Yo, what's up guys, welcome to my humble YouTube channel where I bring you fanfiction that will brighten your days. Before we start, a subscribe is greatly appreciated, and don't forget to leave a like and ring the bell icon so you won't miss exciting new fanfiction stories. Tensura. Melting the Eternal Frost by JackDaWeb. Chapter 19, The Misplaced Guardian. Rimuru Pav Shimo is a rather peculiar monster. She's often quiet, reserved, and very serious when it comes to combat and magic training. I saw great potential in her to become a formidable boss for the dungeon, so I placed her on the 30th floor due to her low EP. But I made a minor mistake in failing to account for her sheer combat prowess and magical affinity. In terms of skill, she's a prodigy at the sword, having completed Hakuru's brutal training in such a short time and even managing to defeat him in a duel once. She was trained by Benimaru in critical thinking and strategy and was shown the art of stealth by Sue. Shuna occasionally watched her train with the other Onis and said that she was incredibly quick at picking up on their teachings. As for magic, she's completely self-taught and learned the basics of fire, ice, and wind magic in under a month. She eventually realized that her affinity was highest with the ice element, so she dedicated most of her magical training to that attribute. Velzard once saw her training with ice magic and was very impressed with her efficiency and output despite her relatively low magicule count. I scanned around the room and all eyes were fixated on the stare-off taking place between Shimo and Team Lightspeed. She stood completely still amidst the harsh snowstorm, blade in one hand and with a look of cold ruthlessness. The group appeared apprehensive and shivered violently as the cold relentlessly ravaged them. This endless snowstorm is courtesy of Shimo's unique skill, near absolute zero. That's another thing that surprised me a lot about her, the fact that she has a unique skill at all, and it's quite powerful too. These are the sub-skills of near absolute zero. Attack dampening creates an area of supercooled air around the user which dampens the force of nearly any incoming attack. Energy siphon allows the user to siphon the thermal energy from their surrounding and use it to replenish their own energy. Temperature drop allows the user to drop the temperature of the surrounding air molecules to a temperature reaching absolute zero. Additionally, winds can also be generated thanks to her use of wind magic, allowing her to create a powerful blizzard that's cold enough to freeze almost any unfortunate adventurer caught within it. The most impressive thing about Shimo is the efficiency at which she consumes magicules, which is to say that she consumes very little at all. She looks extremely powerful. I can feel her cold and menacing aura leaking through the screen. Hinata remarked seriously and the others turned to her with a slight nod. This might be the first real challenge their group faces, Gazel said earnestly. Indeed. And considering that they're down one member, it might be even more difficult now, Elmisia commented seriously. We turned our attention back to the screen and saw that the stare-off was still going on. After a few seconds, Shimo lifted her blade over her shoulder and assumed a battle stance. The group immediately tensed up and readied themselves as the snowstorm became more intense. Hail began falling relentlessly and the group quickly weaved around to avoid getting hit by the fast-moving pellets. As if things weren't difficult enough, there are 5 B-class ogres on this floor which serve as Shimo's subordinates. They were once members of Sue's Kurayami unit, meaning they're all incredibly stealthy and well-trained. The 5 of them are currently hiding in the shadows, waiting for orders to strike. Yeah. This floor should definitely be a lot lower than it currently is. In a flash, Shimo vanished with the use shadow motion, putting the group on edge. They frantically scanned the room trying to look for her. A few moments later, Bernie was met with a powerful kick straight to the face, sending him flying towards one of the ice pillars. Crash! A loud crashing noise echoed as Bernie's body landed against the pillar, shattering bits of ice from it. His eyes rolled back into his head and he immediately coughed up some blood. He then dropped to the ground on all fours and was struggling to get himself together. Bernie! Jiwoo and Masayuki yelled out in horror. Bernie coughed up some more blood before eventually getting back up, looking incredibly dazed and in a lot of pain. Despite his current condition, he remained fierce, drawing out his spear and assuming a fighting stance. His eyes then carefully scanned the room before quickly putting up his weapon, successfully blocking a slash from Shimo who just came out of the shadows. I'm impressed you saw that coming. Shimo praised coldly before disappearing into the shadows once again. Bernie stumbled back a little but managed to stay balanced. TCH, you two, come closer, it'll be bad if we're separated this far. I have a feeling there are more monsters here besides the Guardian. Bernie ordered the two and they immediately oblige. He catches on fast. I complimented genuinely. Foo, he sure does. This floor will most definitely prove to be a major obstacle for them. They might not even make it past Shimo, Velzard remarked casually. Huh? Why are you saying that so casually? Did you forget about the bet? I asked curiously, but Velzard only giggled in response. I'm not too concerned about losing this wager. Besides, I have a feeling you're up to something interesting in the case of your victory. Isn't that right, Rimu-kun? She questioned smugly. Ha. Looks like I've been exposed. He. Maybe. But we'll have to wait until the bet is through, I replied with a smirk. Velzard chuckled before turning her attention back to the fight. Jiwoo and Masayuki ran toward Bernie while simultaneously avoiding the onslaught of hail and icicle shards. Running proved to be very difficult since the floor was incredibly slippery and the snowstorm decreased visibility by a substantial amount. Just as they were about to make it, a shard pierced Jiwoo's foot, causing her to stumble onto the ground face first. Shit. Jiwoo. Bernie and Masayuki cried out. Jiwoo got up, albeit in a lot of pain, and removed the icicle shard from her foot. The injury bled out for a few seconds before the frigid temperature of the room solidified her blood, effectively closing the wound. She then turned her head around in different directions before firing off a lightning spell to her right. The attack managed to hit someone and a body was disintegrated in an instant. Bernie mustered as much strength as he could and ran towards his teammates. He finally reached them after a short but very painful run, and they all turned to where the lightning hit only to find nothing. Unknown to them, Jiwoo only destroyed a clone of Shimo. Did you get her? Masayuki asked anxiously. I don't know. I'm afraid not. Jiwoo replied apprehensively. It might have been a clone. Everyone keep your guard up, Bernie commanded strongly, and the other two quickly steeled their resolve. Behind 5 ice pillars, the ogres waited patiently for their master's order, and it wouldn't be long before they received it. Standing several dozen meters away from Masayuki's group and hidden in the shadows was Shimo. She held her hand in the air with an open palm, and after a few seconds, she brought it back down. This was her signal for the ogres to strike. If I had to guess, her plan was to use the ogres as a distraction while she chipped away at the group one by one. In addition to her incredible combat prowess and magical capabilities, she's incredibly cunning and strategic. She's a living example of existence value not being the most important determiner in a battle. Looks like her subordinates are about to jump into action, Velzard remarked rather excitedly. Yeah. Their group is in for one hell of a beating, I replied earnestly. Right on time, 3 of the 5 ogres charged at Masayuki's group head-on with their swords in hand. Bernie and Jiwoo immediately raised their weapons to defend against the incoming attack, and the latter also put up a defensive barrier at the same time. However, they were unaware of the other 2 ogres who went in a different direction to flank them from behind. Cleeing, the loud sound of steel striking one another reverberated as their weapons made contact. Bernie and Jiwoo were doing their best to hold off the brunt force of the ogres while keeping Masayuki out of harm's way. Since he was more or less useless in combat, this situation had become a 3 versus 2. The 2 in question barely managed to hold on thanks to their superior strength and Masayuki's passive boost. But they were soon about to be even more outnumbered. Masayuki-sama. Find cover. We'll deal with these 3, Jiwoo urged him desperately. But I can't just leave you 2, Masayuki retorted apprehensively. It's fine. We just need to buy some time, Bernie reassured loudly as he continued clashing his weapon against 2 ogres simultaneously. Oh boy. Seems like they're in a real pinch now. The 2 of them are already struggling against 3 ogres, and there are 2 more about to flank them. Their situation has become extremely dire and they need to make a move or else they'll be dead on the 30th floor. Third-person Pav Masayuki reluctantly listened to his teammates' pleas and ran off into the snowstorm. He shivered intensely as he slowly navigated through the harsh blizzard. Luckily for his crew, they were still being boosted by his skill despite him being far away. However, the real problem was that he was now alone without anyone guarding him. This had been Shimo's plan since the very beginning. From the moment their party entered the floor, Shimo could tell that Masayuki posed the biggest problem despite his cowardly and timid nature. She didn't exactly know why, but her combat instincts were telling her to get rid of him first. Now that he was away from his team while they were distracted by her 5 subordinates, she could easily dispatch him. Even if she didn't take direct action, the harsh snowstorm would eventually get to Masayuki and freeze him solid. Once he was dealt with, the boost that Bernie and Jiwoo were receiving would vanish, making it a lot easier to deal with them. Despite being at a disadvantage in terms of magicule count compared to her challengers, Shimo's frightening intellect would prevail in this battle. Masayuki's pav shit. It's freezing. This snowstorm is relentless. It's hard to even see just a few meters in front of me. My limbs are beginning to feel numb. And I can feel my heart rate slowing down as my temperature continuously drops below safe levels. Is this where I die? Alone and in the cold? Well, at least I'll be revived thanks to this bracelet. But that means I'll get a taste of what death is like without truly dying, which is still terrifying. This dungeon really just spiked up in difficulty, huh? We were breezing through the floors with ease before this. Bernie, Jinrai, and Jiwoo seemed unstoppable in the beginning. And I barely did anything aside from giving them a passive boost with my skill. Things started going downhill when we lost our first member. Now we're faced with a terrifying guardian that really shouldn't be on this floor. After what felt like an eternity, I eventually saw one of the walls of this floor a few meters ahead of me. How long had I been walking? I seemed to have lost my sense of time due to the cold freezing my brain. From the looks of things, the intensity of the snowstorm gets weaker the further out from the center of the room you go. This should be a good place to rest up while I contemplate my poor life decisions. With all my strength, I slowly made my way towards the wall to sit down and lean against it. Fury of the frost. Icicle slash. Suddenly, I heard a quiet and disembodied female voice utter those words. My heart began rushing and I instinctively turned my whole body around. Slash instantly, I felt a slashing sensation across the side of my right arm. The force of the unknown attack knocked me down to the ground and I fell on my ass. Ouch! I began frantically looking around the room only to find no one in sight. Slowly raising my arm, I fearfully inspected the damage I had sustained. Aarghhhhhh! I cried out in agony as waves of pure pain hit me all at once. The side of my arm had a long gash across it and was now bleeding profusely. That was so fast, I couldn't even see it coming, and whoever attacked me vanished into the darkness again. I held my injured arm tightly and my breathing began rapidly increasing. I tried my best to calm myself down but it was no use. Due to the extremely frigid temperature of the room, the blood on my arm began to freeze. At least the bleeding will stop. But shit, this hurts like hell. I'm surprised you avoided getting your arm slashed off. That's what I was aiming for, but you turned around just in time and disrupted my attack. Color me impressed, human. I heard the same voice from earlier again. Only this time, it was somewhere right in front of me. I slowly looked up in fear to see who my attacker was. Hidden in darkness from behind one of the pillars, the silhouette of a short figure slowly walked out. It was hard to see what they looked like due to the harsh snowstorm, but I had a dreadful feeling in my gut. After coming a bit closer, I was now able to see who my attacker had been, and no surprise, it was the guardian of this floor herself, the Frost Kijin, Shimo. She had silver hair that was tied into a bun and had 2 black horns protruding from her head. Her eyes glowed a sinister blue with a cold and ruthless look behind them. As for her attire, she donned a teal and white kimono with a black belt tied around her waist. A gray fur scarf adorned her neck, which emphasized her cold-themed appearance. The snow and ice seemed to dance around her as if bending to her will. She had her sword raised above her shoulder and it shone brightly, reflecting the light blue glow of the ice pillars around us. Notably, there are no traces of blood on the weapon, although she probably got rid of it. The air around her was extremely frigid, even more so than it already was. What the hell, Rimuru? Her level of power is way too high to be the boss of just the 30th floor. I'll have to congratulate you and your party for having made it this far. But this is where your journey ends, she said coldly before suddenly vanishing. I frantically began crawling backward in desperation until I backed up against a pillar and immediately felt the immense cold from it. Shit, I'm screwed. Wait, Rimuru's pav yikes. That was cruel. He couldn't even let out a sentence before getting his head chopped off. This display just shows the incredible power of Shimo. She managed to bypass the plot armor of Masayuki's broken skill. The screen promptly cut away from his decapitated body and went back to showing the rest of his crew. I turned to the guests to see their reactions, and while they were a bit shocked, they continued watching nonetheless. However, the children were understandably very mortified. Well, except for Kenya, who seemed to enjoy watching the whole thing. Sigh, I guess boys will be boys. He definitely reads some of the more violent manga series, unlike his peers. On a side note, I will definitely change the floor Shimo is on once their run is over. She's already very powerful, and I'm sure she's about to get even stronger in the future. This happy accident did more or less secure my victory in the bet. However, I do feel bad considering it's because of my mistake. I'll have to think about it later. Looks like their greatest asset is out of the picture. I stated the obvious, and the others around me all nodded in agreement. Indeed. I suppose this is where their journey ends. Gazel remarked a bit solemnly. Looks like you really enjoyed watching their team dominate the earlier floors. Ha ha ha. Isn't this guardian way too powerful to be on the 30th floor, Rimuru Dono? The sudden jump in difficulty seemed too high in my opinion. Errol asked curiously, and I nodded in confirmation. Yeah. It was a mistake I made because I placed the guardians according to their magicule capacity. Shimo's capacity is not very high, but I failed to account for her exceptional capabilities, I explained. That makes sense. Magicule capacity is only one factor that goes into a fight. I believe that skills and combat prowess are what take precedence in deciding an individual's true capabilities. Hinata stated, and I nodded in agreement. True. I don't know about the other guardians, but I estimate that Shimo should be at least on the 40th floor. What do you think, Rimuru-san? Elmisia questioned, and I thought for a moment before answering her. I agree. In fact, knowing the other guardians, Shimo could even be placed on the 60th floor if we ignore magicule capacity entirely and just focus on combat skills. I answered nonchalantly, which shocked almost everyone. Their reactions are expected considering I just revealed that the current 30th floor guardian could be placed on the 60th floor. F for real? Then. That would truly make her a misplaced guardian. Gazel said apprehensively. The guests returned to watching the fight, and I made my way over to Velzard. Fu, I'll take this as my loss, Rimu-kun, she admitted calmly with a gentle smile. Aren't you upset that you lost because of an error I made? I asked somewhat worriedly, but to my surprise, she shook her head. I can see why you made a mistake like that. Monsters are primarily judged based on their magicule count, so it's understandable, she replied calmly. But still. I muttered quietly, still feeling a bit guilty about taking this win. Don't think about it too much, Rimu-kun. Besides, I look forward to what you'll have me do for the next 3 days. She teased seductively, which made my cheeks heat up immediately. No, stop, don't think about that right now. Turning back to the screen, we saw that Bernie and Jiwoo were starting to get overwhelmed by the 5 ogre subordinates. Swords and spears clashed, and the ogres appeared and disappeared from and into the shadows, causing the 2 combatants to become heavily discombobulated. It didn't help that the boost they'd been receiving from Masayuki vanished following his demise. After a lot of chaotic fighting, Bernie managed to land a fatal hit on one of the ogres with his spear, subsequently killing him. The death was only temporary thanks to the dungeon's rules, and the ogre would be revived later. That's 1 down, and 4 more to go, not including Shimo herself, who's currently still hiding in the snowstorm. With her sword in hand, she looks like she's ready to strike at any moment. It appears that Shimo's actual plan is to wear them down using her subordinates before striking at them herself. Even if their boost is gone, Bernie and Jiwoo are still formidable fighters, so Shimo is taking every necessary precaution to ensure her victory. Thus, she stood still in the harsh blizzard, patiently waiting for the 2 adventurers to lose their stamina. So she's wearing them down slowly by using the ogres to tire them out. Velzard pointed out nonchalantly. Yup. In addition to her insane combat abilities and magic usage, she has a very strategic mind. I explained concisely. So she's not only powerful, she's frighteningly smart as well, Hinata replied a bit nervously. We continued watching the all-out clash between the 4 ogres and the 2 remaining members of Team Lightspeed. Jiwoo successfully managed to kill another ogre with a lightning spell, bringing their number down to 3. This raised Bernie and Jiwoo's confidence by a lot now that the conditions were slowly becoming more favorable in their eyes. To the surprise of everyone watching, Shimo suddenly deactivated the snowstorm, making things a lot easier for the two adventurers now that the room became less frigid and visibility had improved. Why'd she dispel the snowstorm? It gave them such a huge advantage, Hinata asked, perplexed at the Guardian's move. The others began thinking as to why she would make such a puzzling decision. Perhaps she's running low on magicules. It was mentioned earlier that she has a rather low magicule capacity, Lewis speculated. That's not it. While her magicule count is low, her efficiency is incredible. Because of that, she can keep the snowstorm active for a very long time while draining very little magicules. I rebutted, making the guests even more puzzled. To be perfectly honest, I'm also confused as to why she dispelled the snowstorm. Shimo likely plans to give Bernie and Jiwoo a false sense of security. Deactivating the blizzard could make them think that she had been defeated by Masayuki. They're also likely to be exhausted after defeating the ogres, meaning it'll be a simple task to catch them off guard. Seriously? She's even using psychological warfare against them? It is a possibility, yes. Holy S***. If that's true, then she becomes even more frightening than she already is. The snowstorm. Shimo-sama has been killed ga. One of the ogres yelled out before getting pierced through the chest by Bernie's spear. Now their numbers are even. Jiwoo. Masayuki-sama has done it. He's killed the floor guardian. This is our chance. Bernie uttered loudly, which raised Jiwoo's morale, and now both of them were raring to go. The two of them faced off against the remaining ogres, who started looking nervous. Yosh. Things looked bad at the start, but this is our victory, Jiwoo declared boldly before quickly stabbing through the heart of another ogre. Only one remains now. Did Shimo perhaps make a mistake? She took away the ogre's main advantage and now their numbers are dropping. Hinata uttered in confusion. The others looked just as puzzled as her, except for Velzard, who wore a grin on her face. Fufufu, not at all. This is all part of her plan. Velzard stated vaguely. Everyone turned their attention to her with a curious look. What do you mean, Velzard-sama? Hinata asked. You'll see soon enough, but all I'll say is that those ogres know that Shimo isn't dead. Velzard answered ambiguously. A few of the guests immediately connected the dots, judging from their widened eyes, while the rest remained puzzled. Turning back to the screen, we saw that the last ogre had been killed with a combined spell cast by Bernie and Jiwoo. After a long and hard-fought battle, the two of them successfully defeated Shimo's 5 subordinates. They carefully scanned their surroundings before slouching in exhaustion and taking deep breaths. That fight really took everything out of them and they barely managed to win. Ha. Ha-HH. We did it, Jiwoo uttered weakly. Why yeah. Let's wait for Masayuki-sama before advancing to the next floor. Bernie replied in a fatigued manner and Jiwoo nodded in agreement. Oh boy, they really think they've won, huh? Ice beam. Shimo chanted quietly and a beam of concentrated ice fired off from the darkness which struck Bernie. His body instantly became frozen inside a block of ice and Jiwoo immediately backed far away and raised her weapon. Bernie. Jiwoo cried out in horror. Her eyes frantically scanned the room around her, but then the raging snowstorm suddenly came back. Due to her now weakened state, the force of the wind knocked her to the ground. Dashing at the speed of sound, Shimo appeared out of darkness and landed a powerful punch on the block of ice, shattering it along with Bernie's entire body. Pieces of ice and body parts flew in all directions and Shimo once again vanished into the shadows. I quickly checked the lobby to see if Bernie had respawned and thankfully he did. His eyes were wide and he looked like he had seen a ghost or something. Jinrai and Masayuki approached him, which seemed to have calmed his nerves. Now it was only Jiwoo left alive. She looked incredibly terrified and her body shook uncontrollably due to the fear and frigid cold. Fortunately for her, I guess, Shimo is not the type to drag out battles, so her death will be quick and painless. Jiwoo closed her eyes, fully accepting her inevitable demise. Thud, the sound of an object hitting the ground could be heard but was quickly drowned out by the intensity of the strong winds. On the screen, Jiwoo's severed head could be seen rolling on the ground, leaving a trail of blood on the cold floor. Her corpse started glowing before vanishing from thin air, leaving nothing but stains of her frozen blood. The broadcast ended and the lobby fell silent. Shimo's display of skill and intellect left a permanent impression on the spectators. I was so focused on the fight earlier that I didn't even realize Caval's group had already respawned and was watching the battle take place. Ignoring them, I turned to Velzard, who had a satisfied grin on her face despite losing our bet. You should really move her to a different floor, Rimuru Dono. Errol said half-jokingly, earning a chuckle from the other guests. Ha ha ha. I agree. Even though their team was clearly a cut above the rest, that sudden jump in difficulty might have been too much for them. Gazel replied earnestly. Yeah, I will. I'm sure Shimo will do perfectly as the 50th floor guardian. I said enthusiastically. The guests nodded in satisfaction to my answer, but then Hinata raised her hand. Question. Is there a possibility that she'll get even stronger? She asked curiously, and the guests looked at me expectantly. I'm certain of it. Shimo is only just a Kijin, meaning she can still evolve into an Oni under the right conditions. I answered honestly. That prospect is terrifying, but it is to be expected, Elmisia remarked casually. I suppose this will conclude the opening of the dungeon. Tomorrow is the day everyone's been waiting for, the fighting tournament, I announced excitedly, and everyone's eyes lit up. Foo. I look forward to my time to shine. Velzard chimed in nonchalantly. Just remember to hold back, will ya? I reminded her blankly, and she chuckled in response. Sigh, Veldora and I have our work cut out for us. After some more closing remarks, we exited the labyrinth and I sent the guests off to their rooms. There were still some parties looking to challenge the dungeon despite the late hour. I suppose that's to be expected since it's open 24/7. Velzard and I walked our way back home, making sure to bask in the beautiful nightlife of Tempest. Even though it was almost midnight, there were still lots of people out and about engaging in the various festivities. We eventually reached our house and quickly made our way upstairs. It was a bit sad not to see Veldora in the living room reading his manga anymore. The Weeb Dragon and his library of manga had now been moved to one of the rooms on the 100th floor of the dungeon. I guess this means that Velzard and I have the entire house to ourselves. Once entering my room, we quickly changed into our sleeping clothes and turned off the lights before lying down in bed. As usual, I stared off into the ceiling thinking about the events that happened today. The successful opening of the dungeon, Shimo's incredible display of power and intellect, and the unexpected bet which I won by mistake. I'm glad Velzard isn't too upset about it though. Rather, she seems a bit excited even. Since I don't feel like the win was fully earned, I only have one thing I'll ask her to do for 3 days. I look forward to tomorrow. Velzard uttered softly, and I laid on my side to face her. I was once again perplexed by her beauty, most especially her blue eyes, which had a faint glow amidst the darkness of the room. I'm sure you are. You should rest up now. Good night, Vels-chan, I said quietly before leaning in and kissing her on the forehead. After pulling back, I was surprised to see her maintain her composure, only blushing slightly with a gentle smile. Foo. Good night, Rimu-kun. She replied in an equally gentle tone before kissing me back on the cheek. Sigh. Seal the Fu King deal after the tournament, Rimuru. I began thinking of ways I could confess to her. Maybe I could do it during one of our dates. No, that'd be too simple. Or how about I take her on a vacation out of Tempest and then do it there? It has potential, but I'll have to think about it more. After my brief brainstorming, I eventually dozed off.